start off is, how weird does it feel for you at the moment having two albums coming out almost at the same time from your two different bands?
Well, exciting and a lot of work at the same time. The Obscura record got delayed a little bit, and at the same time, Tulkandra was ready earlier than expected, since we delivered the new Tulkandra album quite soon after. Actually, we delivered it ahead of the deadline, and somehow we got a spot on the vinyl pressings at the factories, which is a big issue these days, and therefore Napalm decided to release it this year already. So, well, a lot of coincidences, but in the end I'm very happy that both albums are seeing the light of day quite soon.
Yeah.
Tulkandra in 2 days and Obscura in probably around 3 weeks. So it's quite exciting talking about both albums.
I guess it leads to a deeper question as well. When you sit down and start working on lyrics, how do you know which band that track is going to be for, especially when you start with lyrics?
Well, I always write the music first. So first there's a certain vibe I want to gain with the album. There's always a certain master plan for both bands. So the music gets created, and once we start with the pre-production of a certain song, I start to add some patterns. So I know more or less the structure or the framework of how I have to write lyrics. And after all this is ready and ready to set, I'm starting with writing lyrics, not before. I might have some ideas, but I'm not starting to write any sentences or words or anything like that before the music is done.
Okay, so the new album for Obscura, this is the start of a new trilogy. Tell us a little bit about where those ideas came about for this trilogy.
Well, we just finished a trilogy, which took us probably 10 years, and we had a lot of changes to right now. You can compare it with like a blank page in front of you,
yep,
and you're back in school, but you have the experience of 20 years being at school already. So that's kind of cool. And A Valediction is the beginning of this new chapter, and I interpret it that way, that on each beginning you have, also an end. And we delivered the last record, Diluvium, which is more or less dealing with the end of all ends, like the Big Bang, quite a while ago. And now we start something entirely new. And A Valediction means farewell, or let's call it leaving things behind. And therefore this is also a good beginning at the same time. So it simply came together quite naturally how it worked. But the trilogy starts with A Valediction and is so far built on the trilogy. So perhaps there are even more albums going to relate it to. And it deals with, first of all, 3 different colors. Bronze is the new one, silver the second, and gold the third one. I already have a layout of our album titles, of a couple of song titles. I have a raw idea which direction I want to go when it comes to music. But it's not as stiff, and the guidelines are not that strict as we worked in the past. So I have a little bit more freedom on my end, writing music, writing lyrics, working on the visual department. But there's one thing that is above everything, and that's the human touch I wanted to unfold with this album and the entire trilogy. In the past we worked on a quite abstract way. That means it's hard to digest. Like the lyrics are so ahead that rarely anyone understands them. The music is extremely, or has been extremely demanding, extremely polished, extremely sterile in some parts. And I wanted to go exactly the opposite. I shifted the big picture of the band a little bit while keeping its origins. We have a certain signature sound. And if you're familiar with the band, I'm very sure you heard it immediately within the first song. But at the same time, I wanted to have it. I simply wanted to underline that there's a real band performing, like real musicians, and we are not exchanging, for example, all drum sounds with any sound banks. We are not working with presets of guitar sounds. We have our own sound, and I want to underline this and unfold each musician's character a little bit more. And A Valediction itself is the beginning of that.
You mentioned that this album is a little bit different in the fact that the lyrics are much more open for the audience to be able to listen to and understand. Those lyrics are also very deeply personal for you as well. Tell us a little bit about what it was like to sit down and write from, like, it feels like your heart is on the page here. What was that like, writing like that?
It felt a little bit more honest. And if you see the time when this album came together, I lost a couple of friends, family members, also musicians I worked with in the past. And I was simply sitting down, being a little bit on pause, so to say, because we haven't had any live shows for more than a year. And I worked on different fields, but somehow you start to reflect a little bit of your own life. And in my age, it simply became, well, what means a standard, but it became normal that people are just leaving this planet sooner or later, mostly unexpected. The bassist of my other band passed away. He had an accident. Jean Malone, Jean Reinhardt, Alexi Laio, a lot of musicians I had the chance to share the stage with, and also in some of them I played in the band. So they're all not here anymore, and sometimes that hit me quite hard, and I tried to channel this a little bit. And combined with the new start and what I mentioned with the big changes and the new start of Obscura, this was simply fitting. And I always wanted to write lyrics in music that somehow keep myself interesting, and this was simply a part that has been, well, quite influential in the last 2 years or 3 years.
You said that you found it very honest writing like that. Did you also find it challenging? Because I know for myself, I lost my partner nearly 20 years ago now, and whenever I've tried to sit down and write about that, it's been very, very difficult for me to write about. Did you find it challenging to put your thoughts down on paper, or did you almost find it cathartic in that it felt like you were writing in a journal?
That's a very good question. I haven't had any issues writing down all the different lines, but I think that takes quite a while if it turned out the way I wanted to have them, how the lyrics turned out. And you mentioned being cathartic. At the moment, I'm in the middle of it, and I'm not sure. I'm really not sure, to be honest. It was great to write about some things I never talked about. For example, a song like In Unity that deals with the fact that I was born in Eastern Germany, so behind the Iron Wall, and we and my family, we had to escape before the wall was down, so we flew in 1988, and we lost basically everything we had, everything they built up for not generations, but for decades. They simply lost everything and left it behind towards a future they didn't know how it will turn out in the end. So, and this is something that influences my family and myself up to this date somehow. But at the same time, you respect the tiny little things, like small gestures or something in life, a little bit more. And this was something I wanted to write about. And losing friends is a different story. Like Heritage, for example, the song itself was written in the week when Jean Reinhardt passed away. But the lyrics I wrote, I'm not sure, I think a year later, maybe half a year later. It was completely divided from that. So I think I can answer this question in 1 or 2 years when I digested the record myself a little bit more. At the moment, I'm in the middle of it, so I'm not objective in any way.
Definitely. And you mentioned before too about the importance of gold, silver, and bronze. Tell us a little bit about what those three colours mean for this trilogy and what you mean, why you chose those three colours for their meanings.
Well, it's always a way up. It's always a way further. And it's a matter of the value. And for me, this is just the beginning of a trilogy. And personally, I think we have the best album, or the most challenging album just ahead of us. We didn't write our best album yet. And therefore I started with bronze and not with gold.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. And the other thing too about this album is you wrote this during such a tough time as well, that when it was being recorded, I understand you had to go to various studios across Europe. Tell us a little bit about that process, and was that a pleasant process, or did that actually cause problems during the recording?
I would say it was an adventure. Well, first of all, we actually had booked a studio 5 or 6 months earlier, but due to the travel restrictions, our band was not able to enter the country. We are spread throughout Europe. We are based in Germany, but the bassist lives in the Netherlands, our drummer in Austria, both guitarists in Germany. So that was simply not possible, so we had to postpone this. Then I decided to change the producer. I hired Studio Fredman and booked Fredrik Nordström to mix and master the album, and that was definitely a key changer from my point. We recorded everything in national studios, and I was kind of skeptic because I prefer to work with an engineer side by side. Like, next to me, I want to have an engineer who is just taking care of the takes, and I'm just focusing on the performance itself. And the same goes for every other musician. So this time we simply had to trust different people, but it worked very, very well. So all files that got delivered to Sweden have been top notch. We haven't had any issues, no problems, and the big positive part was simply the fact that we had more time. We had more time to work on little details. We had more time recording each instrument. So therefore there was no pressure. Usually you have a certain time frame in the studio. You have to look on your watch every now and then, and you have a certain pressure. So this was not there at all.
You also... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And at Studio Fredman, it was an entire new environment. I never worked abroad when it comes to producing music. I never worked with Fredrik Nordström, so it was a new situation for him as well as for us. And I simply stumbled across a new adventure, and it turned out very, very well. I felt welcome every day in the studio, and the result is just speaking for itself. I'm very happy how this album turned out and how it sounds.
Definitely. It sounds absolutely amazing. And you worked with a musician that's very close to my heart, Bjorn. Bjorn was the first musician I ever interviewed on this show 25 years ago. Tell us a little bit about what it was like working with Bjorn and how that came about for you.
That was not planned at all. That's one of those spontaneous things that happens once in a while. When I was flying over to Gothenburg, recording vocals with Fredrik, we listened to each song I had. So we decided only recording 2 songs a day, just to not destroy the vocal lines or the vocal strings. And we talked a lot. So when we listened to the song When Stars Collide, we talked about what kind of direction this chorus should have, maybe the verse here, maybe the interludes there. And as a side note, I mentioned here, in this part, I would like to do something maybe in the vein of Soilwork or something. And he just said, okay, you want to sound like Soilwork? I recorded probably 10 albums with Björn Stritt, so let's give him a call and see what he thinks. And within 3 days, we had Björn Stritt singing on the album. He delivered a fantastic performance. And, well, it was not planned. It was, it just happened. And I'm very proud because, personally, I'm a fan of the Night Flight Orchestra as well as Soilwork. And he's one of the best and most underrated singers in this scene, in my opinion. I'm very proud having him on the album.
Definitely. And there's a little bit of an 80s vibe with that track as well. Was that there from the original time when you first started working on the track, or was that kind of Bjorn's influence that did give it that little bit of an 80s feel?
I think we had the song didn't change until Bjorn recorded his vocals, because everything was there. But it already had a certain 80s vibe, and we already added some keyboards here and there, and thought, okay, this is really, really far out of our comfort zone of the band, but let's do it anyway, because it's fun. And when Bjorn joined the fold, I think it just went over the top. And we then decided, okay, let's produce a proper video clip that represents everything. So we hired a couple of US cars, or rented a couple of US cars for shooting the video, got some leather jackets, and it was really a fun project, definitely. It was really, really fun and spontaneous. And this is something we haven't established in this band in a very, very long time. So for us, it was quite refreshing. And the entire album was really fun to assemble. We really enjoyed making music together, writing those 11 songs, and also worked on those video clips. It was just fun from front to end, and I hope you as a listener also somehow feel this excitement we as a band had while we recorded and produced the record.
I think they will. It certainly comes across when you take a listen to it. And I guess to finish up, that's what I would like to ask you. What would you like to say to all of the listeners out there before they sit down and take a listen to this album now in a few weeks' time?
With the words of Fredrik Nordström, Obscura is BOM, best of metal. So there's everything you want.
Definitely. Well, mate, thank you so much for taking